Hello and welcome to Monster of the Week, the show where we dig up old creatures from past editions of D&D and other tabletop games and bring them to light for use in your current 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons campaign. My name is Josiah, also known as Dungeon Dad, and today we are talking about a monster inspired by Greek mythology, which will be useful in any D&D game really, but especially for those of you out there who are running Theros campaigns. You might find this of higher interest. But before we actually get into this monster and today's video, I do just want to talk to you guys a bit about some housekeeping stuff and kind of give you a little bit of an update on what's going on with the channel. So first things first, we've been running a monster creation contest on the Dungeon Dad Discord channel. You can find a link to that down below if you want to join the Discord just for any reason, but especially if you're interested in creating cool monsters or seeing what other monsters people in the community have made. There's a monthly contest that we started. September's contest is kind of wrapping up. I'm sure by the time this video goes up, it will probably be over, but it's never too late to get involved and get in on October's contest, where the theme is likely going to be something spooky. But basically the whole idea is community members submit monsters, and at the end of the month, myself and the lovely team of mods are going to pick which one we feel is the best monster design and most creative and all that kind of stuff. And it might show up in one of the live streams that I've been doing lately. And who knows, maybe down the road, if we start kind of getting a little bit more invested with this, we might get some artwork commissioned and all that stuff. Plus, you get like a super fancy role on the Discord so everyone knows how cool your monsters are. Because at the end of the day, no prize is worth more than bragging rights. The second thing I wanted to mention is those live streams. I've been streaming a lot more now with my friend Zero Doxy. The two of us have kind of merged our content and our communities. And we've been streaming tabletop games over on Twitch 3 times a week. Basically, what we've been doing is every Monday, we're streaming a kind of a one-shot, solo-contained adventure.
I go, kill me?
He says, very cool! And a magnum appears in his hand, and he just shoots you in the face. Every Wednesday, we've got a bit more of a long-running campaign, which right now is Theros Strands of Fate, which is a game DM'd by yours truly, set in the world of Theros, of course, where all the players are kind of vying to become the next Emperor of Theros.
Vigo's gonna stand up, and he's gonna hold his goblet up or mug and tell everyone, fill your glasses, fill them, yes, yes. People of Melitus and all those from all corners of Theros, I make a pledge, no, an oath, that I, Vigo Aurelius, will bring back Astari's heart, and I will see Ephematus, is that how you say the first name? Ephemiatus' quest complete, and see that the astral balance, ordained by Clothis, return to the natural order. And then he's gonna bang on his breastplate, and him and his boys are gonna give a hooah!
And Fridays are just kind of a mixed bag. Right now we're playing in a D&D campaign that is using the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition system, but it's heavily inspired by the 90s cartoon Reboot, and we're all playing as programs in a computer fighting malware and viruses, and it's just like ridiculous. I'm going to cast Adblock, also known as Shield of Faith, which is going to bump my AC up by 2 for the next 10 minutes or so.
And he says, more viruses come to challenge me? Fools! I am Norton Antivirus. There is nowhere you can hide. There is nothing you can do. I will find you. I will end you.
I just draw my sword and point at him, just say, Norton, you've become the very thing you sought to destroy. We will give you rest. Anyways, if you are interested in checking out any live play content at all, there's a link to the Twitch channel in the description below. That would mean the world to me if you guys check that out. Especially because those Monday one-shots are all using monsters that I have created for Monster of the Week. And you've probably seen a couple of them pop up on the channel here, just the VODs from those one-shot sessions. And that's what that's all about. So going forward, you can expect Monster of the Week videos and the one-shots using said monsters in practical application. Lastly, I just want to apologize that there's been a lack of content on this channel lately. While we've been doing this merger and figuring all the stuff out and like buying assets and getting artwork commissioned and all this other stuff, it's just consumed so much of my time. Fortunately, that should be mostly behind me now, so we're gonna kind of get back into the swing of things here, but that's what's been going on. Anyways, all that aside, or if you just click the timestamp in the comment I'm going to leave below this, we are now going to talk about the Gegenees, which is a Greek giant 6-armed monster man, and they're just the coolest. These giants are only large in size because they're not really full-blooded giants like hill giants or storm giants the way that we really think of them. They're giant kin, so they're kind of halfway between a person and a giant, like 12 to 15 feet tall. Also, they have 6 arms, which is kind of interesting. And today we're going to talk about the lore of this creature and how you can use them in your games, as well as what they're capable of in combat and how you might design some encounters around them. So, fee, fi, fo, fum, I hope that's not a natural 1, because we are about to talk about some... When talking about the Gegenees, the first thing that is obviously going to come up is the fact that they have 6 arms. How does that play into their ability to do battle? Well, for starters, it allows them to hold any combination of weapons that could use and benefit from having 6 limbs. So they could have 6 one-handed weapons, they could have 3 two-handed weapons, they could have a 2-handed weapon and 4 other one-handed weapons. Any combination is on the table, and each one of these warriors can kind of pick and choose their own fighting style. So for example, you could have one of these things that literally just wields 3 great swords to do a ton of extra damage, or you could have one that wields 3 longbows and stands back from afar and gets 3 shots every single turn. You could also have one that has a great sword for the big damage, a shield to get some extra armor class, and 2 short swords to get a couple quick attacks in, then maybe they're poisoned. There's all different combinations of weapons that you can play with, and no matter what you do, the Gegenees is going to get 4 melee attacks on each of its turn. The only stipulation there is that each attack has to use a different weapon. And of course, if it has nothing in its hands, then it can just do a slam attack. By default, I have the stat block set up to use a spear, so it's got a bit of a ranged option and something it can throw. It has a short sword, so it just has those quick attacks. It has kind of a claw weapon, and of course it has its natural slam. The other thing a creature this large with 6 arms is going to excel at is grabbing and grappling and climbing. So of course it has a climb speed, and it also has advantage on checks to maintain or start a grapple. But it also has the ability to hurl objects. Like most giants, it can hurl a stone, which causes a decent amount of damage and gives it a ranged option. However, because the Gegenees can kind of get up close and personal, if it has another creature grappled, as long as that creature is medium or smaller, it can hurl them instead of a stone, causing damage to both the creature that it throws and the creature that it hits. The other way you can use this ability is just to kind of mix up combat, because yes, it can throw a character at another character, but it can also just throw that character up to 30 feet, so it doesn't need to be targeting someone else. It can just throw them at the ground in front of another Gegenees, for example, so they take some of that damage and set that creature up to then do a bunch of damage with all of its melee attacks. Or maybe the second Gegenees picks it up and throws it to another one, and they basically just play catch with this small human. They could also, I don't know, throw them off a cliff, throw them into a pool of lava, throw them just somewhere that they don't want to be. It's definitely a fun kind of use of the typical giant throw stone ability that's going to probably catch some of your players off guard, and will also make combat a lot more interesting if you use it in clever ways. Something else that might catch your players off guard too is part of the multi-limbed trait that these guys all have is that they are able to take 2 attacks of opportunity each turn instead of just the regular 1. So you might have one of your characters run past one of these things and it takes a swipe with one of its swords, and then another character engaged in melee with that Gegenees thinks, oh, well, this one already used its attack of opportunity, so it's safe for me to escape, and then it gets backhanded by its club from one of its other hands. I mean, once that happens for the first time, the element of surprise is gone, but having 2 reactions might not always matter, but when it does, it can be really, really useful. And that's pretty much what the Gegenees have to offer in terms of martial combat prowess. They're fun to run in just a straight up fight, and if that's how you want to use them, then that's a great way to do it. But they also benefit greatly from the terrain that they're on. Like, the environment becomes so much more important when you're dealing with these guys because they have those extra attacks of opportunity and because they have the ability to grab creatures and just biff them up to 30 feet away. Now, if you do like this monster and you think you want to use it or look at all the abilities more in depth, you can find the stat block link in the description below, which is in the form of a Google document and contains everything you need to run this creature. If you are also one of my lovely patrons, you can find this stat block on the Patreon page or in the Google Drive that patrons have access to that has all of my monsters in it. And that patron stat block, of course, is in like the monster manual format. It's all Photoshop with the art and descriptions and lore and all that fun stuff. If you're not one of my patrons, I definitely recommend checking that out. It's $3 a month. Get some monster stat blocks, but I digress. And the final thing we're going to talk about today, of course, is how to actually use this creature in your games. So without further ado, let's talk about some... So first things first, let's talk about where the Gegenees actually comes from. This creature originally found its way into the world through Greek mythology. They were one of the monsters that
Jason and the Argon.
battled against, and basically what ended up happening is
Jason and the Argon.
fought them with his boys. His boys left the island, just forgot
Jason.
there. They went back for him. He was still fighting them. The boys joined in and they all fought the giants, and eventually they killed all of them. That's pretty much it. Definitely feel free to just use these in that kind of capacity, you know? They can be just a random encounter that your players come across. They could come across a cave or just a whole camp of these creatures and end up fighting them potentially to the death. If you are going to run them like that, I'd recommend putting them in a location where they have the ability to throw players down cliffs and where they can throw enemies at one another and set up big home runs, essentially. Because the more dynamic the terrain is, the more fun you're going to have running these guys in combat. The second point I want to touch on here, however, is just what exactly these creatures are. Because in Greek mythology, they're just straight up giants. They just are what they are. They're a race that exists, and that's totally fine. If you're running a Theros campaign that's got all that Greek flavor in it, throwing these guys in just as a race that exists probably on an island somewhere in the Siren Sea makes perfect sense. Even outside of Theros, they can be just a race of giant creatures, just large six-armed beings. There's way weirder stuff than that exists in Dungeons and Dragons, and most of it doesn't even have as much reason to be there as these guys might. But if you are using these creatures outside of Theros, they could have all manner of different origins. It could be just a straight-up magical experiment, or maybe our good old pal Thessalar was up to some fun, weird science creation stuff, or perhaps they're literally giant-blooded, where this all started as a union between a giant and some other type of creature, and these creatures, while they're large, are not massive like the hill giants and the storm giants and other types of giants that we're accustomed to. So that would explain why they're not as big, but they're still pretty fucking big. If you wanted to go this route, you could even introduce different NPCs within groups of Gegenees that are like giant-blooded sorcerers that can cast some of the magic that the giant blood Unearthed Arcana sorcery path can take. And honestly, making these guys as members of a community and actually like role-playing them as people is, I think, where they shine the most. Because while they're not geniuses, they have an intelligence score of 10, which is just straight up average across the board. So these guys on average are going to be as smart as just any other human or elf or dwarf or whatever. And also, because they're not literally colossal in size, for these guys to have like a town or a village or some type of settlement isn't completely out of the question in most settings. The reason we don't really see that as much with something like a storm giant is because they're so huge. What a storm giant would consider a small hamlet would be like a massive kingdom by regular mortal standards. Also because there's like lore implications with the Age of Giants being over and all that kind of thing. But just in general, from a game perspective, having a giant village is a huge thing. Whereas Gegenees, while giants in their own right, are just large creatures, so you can totally have a society of these guys existing with much bigger houses than what we would normally see, and bigger, like, 15-foot doorways and that kind of thing, but still nothing that's going to be like out of the question and unreasonable that's going to require you to repaint your entire map of your homebrew setting to fit in a society of these guys somewhere. So you could give these guys their own culture and beliefs and gods and all that kind of stuff and kind of create a faction within your world if you really wanted to. Or if you don't want to go that all out with the world building, you could simply just have a small village of these guys that your party comes across, and questing ensues. Whether they're the antagonists, whether they're friendly, or somewhere in between, that's kind of the beauty of intelligent creatures, right? Is they can fall on any one of those parts of the spectrum. I really like the idea of an adventure where these guys are set up as kind of like the villainous enemies, when it turns out that they're not really that villainous. They just look kind of scary to a group of humans, but they're just fighting for something that they believe in and for their own rights and freedoms and whatever the conflict happens to be. Make your players empathize with your villains, DMs, and maybe some of them don't even turn out to be villains, who knows. So that's pretty much all I've got for the Gegenees this week. If you liked this video and you like what I'm doing and you want to see more, please subscribe. If you're already subscribed, awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. As I mentioned before, stat blocks in the description below. What is also down there is a link to our Discord, a link to my Twitter if you want to get moment-by-moment updates and insight into my daily thoughts, which maybe you don't want that on second thought. And, you know, you can also find the link to the Twitch channel where we're streaming all this stuff. And the Theros game that we're running on Wednesdays right now, there is a 100% chance that you're going to see the Gegenees show up in that campaign at some point. So definitely check that out as well. If you haven't watched any of the Theros stuff and you want to watch the first, I think, 3 sessions that are out now, all of that is being hosted on Doxy's channel. And I've got a playlist on my page as well. So if you're just on the Dungeon Dad YouTube page, you'll see one of the bars there has a playlist for Theros Strands of Fate, which is the first 3 episodes of the proper campaign and a couple prologue one-shots that we did, which were super fun. And if you have any monsters you'd like to see brought to life in 5th edition, whether they're from other tabletop games, older versions of D&D, or just some type of mythology, definitely let me know either here in the comments or at me on Twitter or hit me up on Discord, and I will be happy to add them to the list and take a look. In any case, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Until then...